The lead director of Overwatch, Aaron Keller, posted a Season 3 developer update. There's a lot of good info and insight here to go through, so let's jump right into it. Post begins with, a few weeks ago we published the first in this series of updates on the game. It's crazy how much has happened since then. We launched Season 3, announced a collab with One Punch Man, and I'm now dating Genji. I feel so lucky. Gonna jump in here just to say that I didn't play Overwatch myself, but I did watch a lot of clips of it, and even though it wasn't for me or for a lot of other players, it's still great to see Blizzard even attempting something like this. Overwatch followed by the top-notch Doomfist One Punch Man crossover honestly shows that Blizzard's trying new things, new collabs, and more great things are gonna come down the road. Aaron continues, I wanted to dive into two topics today, Season 3 balance and the matchmaker. We feel that the start of Season 3 is in a much better state of balance than the start of Season 2. We hear from players that balance is the best it's been since the launch of Overwatch 2. While the game feels fresh based on all the changes made, it's been great watching that discussion and to foster it. I'd like to give a bit more details and a bit less commentary. Let's look at the support role first. On the positive side, most supports are viable in nearly every skill tier. Brigitte has really popped this season and has the highest win rate for nearly all skill tiers except for top 500, where Zen takes the lead, with both averaging out at a nearly 55% win rate. On the other end of the spectrum are Kiriko and Moira at around 45%. This goes to show that the heroes with the highest win rates aren't always the heroes that are played the most. When we look at who is actually being played, the top supports are Ana, Kiriko, and Mercy for nearly all skill tiers until Silver and Bronze, where Moira becomes picked quite a bit. It's counterintuitive that Kiriko has such a high pick rate at the highest levels of play, but such a low win rate, and Brigitte has such a high win rate but a mediocre play rate. While it could be fun to pick on this group, we tend to think that the highly skilled players are continuing to pick certain heroes for good reasons, and we're getting additional metrics for maps, team comps, and team fights to try and understand this. If it's fruitful, expect to hear more about it. I find this interesting, and it also makes a lot of sense. Players, including myself, will continue to play heroes like Ana or Kiriko in losing situations, where switching might be optimal, but it's not as clear or obvious as when heroes like Zen or Brig aren't working. You can start a game as one of these two, but if the enemy is able to single you out and abuse the weak points in their kits, most players will generally switch off quickly. But this season is definitely starting to show the power of Brig and especially Zen in this meta. It's fun to see the cast of viable heroes be completely open. Aaron now dives into the tank role, saying, tanks are in a great spot right now. It's almost hard to pick a bad tank. At the top end, Reinhardt has the highest win rate of tanks for most tiers, reaching about 58% in bronze through platinum. At masters and above, Sigma edges him out and sits at 55% in the top 500. Hog is struggling a bit, even though there are still situations where he can be successful. Winston and Zarya can perform well at certain ranks, and the rest of the roster is solid across all tiers. Wrecking Ball is probably the biggest tank topic in the community right now, with takes varying. Some think he's overpowered, others feel that he's in a good spot, and still others think both and flip-flop back and forth. His win rate is among the top 3 to 4 tanks at most tiers and bounces between 51 to 55%. His pick rate is lower in the metal ranks, increasing as player skill rises. By top 500, he is far and away the most picked tank. We think that this has enabled other heroes to stand out in the current meta along with Wrecking Ball, but we are keeping an eye on him and want to make sure that players don't get fatigued of seeing too much of the little guy. I always find it interesting to see the way the tank role shapes the entire meta. With Ball's emergence into a top-picked tank, we're seeing heroes that counter him like Mei, Sombra, and Symmetra, and heroes that synergize well like Tracer or Genji being picked far more. I'm also extremely happy to see main tanks like Ryan and Sig are being played far more than last season. I think we went through the worst of the tank balance that we'll see with the Doom, Hog, and Orisa era, and now Blizzard has hit a near perfect sweet spot on the tank balance. With the recent Mercy changes, it's definitely hit Winston hard since he literally can't kill a target that's being healed by a Mercy, and Zarya pretty much just feels like an answer to Orisa or D.Va at this point and struggles to find value elsewhere. But overall, the tank role went from awfully balanced to pretty close to perfect. The growing pains of rebalancing the tanks to fit 5v5 actually feel like they're over, and we're just now starting to see a great road being paved ahead of us for Overwatch 2. Next, Aaron moves on to discuss the damage role. There have been some big swings in the damage role. There are two big stories here. From a numbers perspective, DPS feels fairly balanced across the board, and Season 3 has been called the season of Hitscan, or probably the season of Cassidy. Changes to Sojourn, as well as buffs to a few other characters, have opened a new set of heroes for people to play. Cassidy, Pharah, Widowmaker, and Tracer have all risen in playtime. In fact, Cassidy is the most picked hero by a huge margin at all ranks except for top 500, where he's tied with Tracer and he continues to move up. Around 30% of matches have a Cassidy on both sides. Besides Symmetra, it's harder to talk about the most powerful heroes for DPS at middle to higher ranks. The band that most damage heroes fall within is between 47 to 53% win rate. Pharah, Widow, Tracer, and Sim hover around the top, but things shift around almost daily. At low ranks, the top heroes by win rate are Symmetra and Torbjorn. It's always Symmetra and Torbjorn. In fact, Symmetra typically has the highest win rate in the game for all roles at all ranks except Masters and above. Sombra at the low end of power did have a significant lift this season and has a win rate of around 46% at Diamond and above. With the current state of the game, we're not looking at doing balance changes until our mid-season patch. There isn't too much to touch on here. Cassidy is being played a ton at all ranks, and while his magnetic grenade is frustrating, I think we're all thankful to not be seeing near as much Sojourn. The rise in playtime and win rate for Sombra, like I stated earlier, is probably a result of Wrecking Ball being frequently played, and she is also still a great answer to Doomfist. Nobody wants a Sombra meta, but if her job, quote unquote, is going to reside in answering the aggressive and oppressive tanks, I actually think that's a really good balance spot for her. They've mentioned in the past that they're going to do a Sombra rework coming down the road. It's unfortunate he didn't give us more detail on that in this post, but I'm sure we'll hear something soon. Symmetra having the highest win rate all the way up to Masters is really interesting. Obviously, I would attest this to her turrets being really difficult for lower skilled players to play around or deal with. But on top of that, similar to Brig and Zen, when she's not working, people usually don't play through it. They'll just switch off. So in the end, that's going to result in her having a boosted win rate. Like Sombra, we have heard some mentions of more sim reworks, but no more detail on that either. Keller finishes this post discussing matchmaking. We made some big changes to the matchmaker this season. The primary goal was to optimize the pairing of players to minimize the MMR difference within a specific role. For example, when making matches, we put more emphasis on the DPS players on each team being closer in skill than we do for the DPS players on one team being evenly matched with the tank players on the other team. This has worked, and the matches have a much tighter skill delta between players of the same role. There have been some other positive effects to these changes. In ranked, queue times have dropped, and for high skill matches, they've dropped significantly. Average match quality has also risen across the board. Also, matches with longer queue times are typically of a higher quality now than they were previously. Previously, the longer a player waited, the looser our restrictions on the skill difference could potentially be. This is still true, but that range should be more condensed. However, there have been some downsides to these changes, some of them unforeseen. Queue times have risen in unranked a bit, and for groups with large skill differentials, they've risen quite a bit. We've made changes here, and queue times for unranked are already moving lower. We've also heard from players that they are experiencing large win-loss streaks in games. To be clear, we don't try to cause or prevent streaks based on an ideal win rate for players. We're studying these reports and we'll share more information when we get it. The issue that we're hearing most from our players is encountering people from vastly different skill levels in their ranked games. Prior to Season 3, the worst 5% of Grandmaster level matches would have players 7 divisions apart, the equivalent of Gold 3 to Silver 5. When we initially shipped 2.3, this leaped to 12 divisions apart or greater. We have made numerous changes since then and are making changes almost daily, and this has now been reduced to 9 divisions. We have additional changes planned for the mid-season patch that should improve this further. Personally, I've noticed the drop in queue time significantly. I rarely wait longer than 2 minutes for any role, and I think this is the best it's been since role queue was first introduced. I like the matchmaking being a little looser and queue times faster, rather than waiting longer for a match that's likely going to still be unbalanced regardless. See, Overwatch matchmaking is extremely tricky since you can have 2 players that may be the same skill level, but one player plays a hero that strongly counters the other. Suddenly that one player has to swap to a hero they're weaker on, and just like that, the balance of the matchmaker is gone. Even map to map significantly changes the state of balance, or rather each player's effectiveness, depending on if that map is good for their best heroes. But I appreciate the Overwatch team dropping these detailed posts, giving us insight into their thoughts and what they see on their end. Blizzard knocked it out of the park this season balance-wise. So let's hope that this new hero coming in Season 4 is able to slide in nicely and not break apart all that's been put together. Hey, let me know how you feel about what Keller and the team had to say about Season 3. As always, appreciate you for subscribing, and check out my Twitch streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thank y'all for watching. Peace.